The moving truck pulls away from a stucco house in the San Fernando Valley, trailing a sedan with a spreadsheet open inside. A California household earning $250,000 loses a $20,000 slice to state income tax, but Texas charges 0%. By crossing state lines, that entire $20,000 block returns to their pocket every single year. 9 states make this promise: Texas, Florida, Nevada, Washington, Wyoming, South Dakota, Alaska, Tennessee, and New Hampshire market themselves directly to high-earning households. This math is completely real. The 0% line item drives a massive wealth migration across state borders, fueled by expectations of a permanent financial raise. But there is a glaring omission in the brochures selling these moves. A state government cannot simply decide to stop collecting revenue. Schools still need funding, roads require paving, police and hospitals demand real dollars. Erasing an income tax does not erase a state's underlying need for cash. It simply relocates that requirement to a different line item. That $20,000 tax liability didn't disappear. It sits waiting for this family, quietly hidden inside the very house they are about to buy. 6 weeks later, the family closes on a $600,000 home in a growing Austin suburb. Roughly a year after that, an envelope arrives in the mail demanding a level of immediate liquidity they never anticipated. On this national property tax chart, Texas surges into the top tier, taking nearly 1.8% of assessed value. On a $600,000 home, minus a $100,000 exemption, the remaining taxable base generates an annual bill up to $9,000. Unlike an income tax, quietly siphoned from a biweekly paycheck in small, manageable increments, this bill arrives all at once. It demands up to $9,000 in liquid cash, due immediately as a lump sum. Subtract that aggressive front-loaded property tax from the original $20,000 income tax savings, and the actual net gain of moving to a zero-tax state begins to shrink. To understand why this sudden bill catches new arrivals off guard, you have to look at the tax structure they left behind. Decades ago, California voters passed Proposition 13, building a strict defensive wall around existing homeowners. This graph illustrates the mechanics of that protection. While the top line representing a home's real market value can climb sharply, the bottom line representing the taxable assessed value is capped at a strict 2% annual increase. Texas offers no equivalent statewide cap on assessment growth. If the local housing market surges, existing homeowners are fully exposed to the resulting financial ripples. And instead of a single unified rate, Texas operates a complex shell game. Independent school districts, county governments, and municipal utility boards all act autonomously, aggressively stacking their own individual tax rates on top of a single property. The family's total tax burden hasn't vanished across state lines. It has reorganized into an opaque, highly front-loaded structure layered directly onto their mortgage to fund the rapid expansion of a booming state. The real danger of this system surfaces a few years into the new mortgage. In fast-growing suburban markets, county appraisal districts aggressively update property values to match local market demand. A home originally purchased for $600,000 can quickly be reassessed at $750,000. The property tax bill climbs in direct proportion to that new number, arriving regardless of whether the family's actual wages increased at all. This side-by-side comparison shows two vastly different tax philosophies. On the left is an income tax system.
Whatever its size, the bill is anchored to real liquid cash that actually flowed into the household that year. A rising property tax bill is anchored instead to phantom wealth. The expanding vault represents an appraisal district's estimate of what the house could theoretically sell for, a paper value the homeowner has never actually cashed out, yet must somehow produce real dollars to satisfy. If a homeowner cannot generate liquid cash to cover these unrealized paper gains, the unpaid taxes do not simply accumulate as a polite invoice. The taxing authority attaches them directly to the property as a legal lien. A 30-year mortgage is traditionally understood as the finish line of homeownership. You pay off the bank and you own the house free and clear, completely insulated from further housing payments. But a sustained failure to pay a property tax lien empowers the local government to initiate foreclosure proceedings. They can seize the property entirely to satisfy the debt, instantly wiping out decades of accumulated equity. Because the obligation to the local taxing authority never actually ends, an uncapped property tax effectively erases that finish line. Under this system, you never own your home outright. You are simply renting it back from the county, indefinitely, one appraisal cycle at a time. Millions of households have crossed state lines chasing the mathematical promise of keeping everything they earn. Ultimately, they traded a temporary tax on their income for an eternal, escalating rent on their own property. Packing up a moving truck to cross state lines and claim a 0% income tax bracket comes with an undeniable sense of financial optimism. But for many migrating households, that initial excitement starts to fade into the background the moment the local billing realities set in. Relocating hundreds of thousands of people requires an immense amount of physical infrastructure: new roads, new utilities, and heavily expanded civic services. Someone ultimately has to hold the bill for all of that continuous expansion. When you look closely at where a new resident's localized tax bill actually goes, a clear picture emerges. The single largest recipient of those funds is the local public school district. Without a broad state income tax to pull from, the massive financial weight of public education is shifted directly onto localized property values. The system essentially requires every newly arrived family to act as a necessary revenue engine to keep the lights on. Because of how this burden is distributed, school districts located inside fast-growing, high-appraisal suburbs inherently generate considerably more education funding per student than districts sitting in slower-growing, lower-appraisal areas. This hyper-localized funding structure hands local governments and school boards a real, documented reason to actively welcome rapid new home construction. Adding dense clusters of housing to the map is exactly how they feed their required tax base. Real estate developers and home builders fit neatly into this ecosystem. They utilize the state's 0% income tax as a perpetual, extraordinarily effective marketing hook to drive a constant influx of buyer demand. The entire cycle feeds itself. New residents arrive, drawn by the zero tax promise, which triggers new construction. That development drives up surrounding home appraisals, which generates the higher property tax revenue needed to fund the schools and infrastructure. That localized development then attracts the next wave of residents, and the loop repeats. When an individual homeowner receives an escalating appraisal, it can feel like a bureaucratic error. It isn't. The rising appraisal is the intended, functional design of a localized system that relies on constant, compounding growth to survive. When you compare the different states utilizing this model, you find that they do not handle this underlying property tax burden identically. The math changes wildly based on where you unpack your boxes. Florida, for example, layers on a specific constitutional protection called the Save Our Homes Amendment. This legislative mechanism legally caps the annual assessment increase on a primary residence at 3% per year, regardless of how aggressively the surrounding real estate market appreciates. This bar chart displays the massive gap between the effective property tax rates, the actual percentage of your home's value you pay, in these two states. Florida sits meaningfully lower, at roughly 0.7%, while Texas ranges from 1.6 to 1.8%. On a comparably priced home, that percentage gap translates to well over $1,000 in additional annual tax burden. When you project these numbers over a 10-year holding period, the impact of a legislative cap becomes unavoidable. A capped assessment keeps your out-of-pocket costs relatively flat over time. Without that protection, the uncapped rate compounds rapidly upward year after year, completely altering the cost of living, even if two families bought identically priced homes. Nevada applies its own capped framework to assessments, combining those limits with a lower effective rate, around 0.5% for its desert suburbs. The presence or total absence of state legislative protections is a far more accurate predictor of your long-term housing costs than a zero income tax headline. There is a second, highly volatile variable that quietly destroys the long-term financial math for households relocating to specific, climate-exposed regions within these states. Along the Texas Gulf Coast and throughout Florida, regional homeowners insurance premiums have escalated dramatically as weather patterns intensify. The private insurance market is aggressively reassessing its exposure to severe storms and persistent flooding. Faced with catastrophic physical damage payouts, several major national insurers have drastically scaled back their coverage availability or chosen to exit these high-risk counties entirely. Relocating homeowners in these zones now face an increasingly hostile financial reality. They are stacking a rising, unpapped local property tax bill directly on top of an insurance premium that can double in a handful of years, leaving them completely exposed without any statutory limits. For many climate-exposed households, the initial income tax savings that justified their interstate move are completely neutralized by these two uncapped, overlapping cost centers. Evaluating a state-to-state move requires pushing past the marketing materials and running a strict, methodical financial audit before signing a mortgage. You have to calculate the total tax and housing cost burden. That means isolating a target county's highly localized, effective property tax rate, rather than relying on a state's broad, often misleading statutory rate. It is absolutely necessary to check if your destination state offers a statewide assessment cap. Historical tax revolts, driven by sudden 300% spikes in local bills, show exactly why these protections are the only reliable defense against market appreciation. Treat your property tax as a non-negotiable monthly cash reserve obligation. Unlike a traditional mortgage that eventually gets paid off, the localized tax bill never actually reaches a finish line. And if you are purchasing in a coastal or flood-prone region, you must secure a brand new, customized insurance quote before closing on the property. Relying on a seller's outdated premium data will leave you completely exposed to recent market rate hikes. None of this indicates that moving to a no-income tax state is an inherent mistake. If a household strategically secures a capped assessment structure, or if they have substantial investment income to offset the localized burdens, the long-term math remains highly favorable. The advertised 0% income tax is merely an incomplete financial picture. It requires careful, skeptical scrutiny to uncover how the surrounding local economy actually funds itself. If you've ever relocated states specifically to chase a lower tax bill, drop down into the comments and tell us honestly whether your total math actually aligned with your expectations once taxes and insurance were factored in. Dissecting hidden financial mechanics and comparing how localized policy impacts daily life is exactly what we do here. Hit subscribe for more deep dives like this, and we'll see you in the next video.